I think we got everyone out of the waiting room. So good afternoon, folks. Good morning to some. Happy Friday to all. My name is Tom Shukas. I am the manager for network communications with 988 Lifeline. And I want to thank you all for being here for our unified platform update for the month of May. Before we begin, I just want to give a couple of housekeeping reminders as we move through the presentation today. It is being recorded and it'll be made available at some point in the near future on the Network Resource Center in case you or your colleagues weren't able to attend the entire presentation. For everyone who is entering, I'm going to ask that if you could please keep your cameras off and your microphones on mute so that way we can hear the presentation clearly. We do have real-time captioning and ASL interpretation here. You'll see that the ASL interpreters are spotlighted. So in case you are needing that ASL interpretation, they are there. And if you would like the closed captioning, you should be able to find an option there at the bottom of the Zoom toolbar. For those who have questions or comments or feedback throughout the presentation, please, we want to hear all of your thoughts and all of your questions. Feel free to put them in the chat throughout the presentation, and then we will use those questions to form the basis of a question answer response section at the end of the presentation. If we don't get to every question, that does happen in some of these updates. We love the engagement, but we can't always fit it into the hour. So if we don't get to a particular question that might be asked, if we don't know the answer, we run out of time, we'll make sure that we do include it in our regular question answer document that we usually send along after each of these update presentations. So fear not, if you have a question or if you think of a question afterward, reach out to us, let us know. We'll make sure that it's included in our question answer document. And with that, I think that's all of the housekeeping. I'm going to pass it along to Morgan Baker for our presentation today.
Thanks, Tom. Hello, everyone, and welcome. As Tom mentioned, we're going to do a quick status update on the unified platform, and then we have a demo for you about 17 minutes long or so, the counselor experience. And then after that, a little Q&A. Thank you, Analia, for bringing up the presentation. Okay, so the unified platform status update. So release 2, really targeted chat and text functionality, has moved into production, and that was on May 2nd. The functionality is not yet in use, but it is in the production environment. The 2 voice centers that were already there are using that production environment, and there were some backlog requirements that were worked in to that release as well, and they would see those if they applied to the voice side. With respect to training, for the chat text centers coming on board, that's scheduled for May 10th through the 16th. And then the migration of those centers will be completed on May 23rd. And that's when that deployment occurs. We say migration there because coming over from the Pure Connect stack, that legacy stack that we have currently, so we'll be moving them from there over to the unified platform to begin utilizing the chat and text functionality there. For release 3, we have a target date of July 7th, really focusing here on the enablement of Spanish chat text. So we do have a fairly firm target date for that as dictated by our federal partners, as well as a few other stakeholders. So that's the priority. We do have some backlog requirements. We'll try and work in there as long as we can keep to that timeline of the 7th. With regards to Spanish chat text enablement, the requirements signed off and design has started. And we will be doing center selection soon. The target date there is 6/9. We continue to work on that extended package. The plan was to incorporate that into release 3, With the new target date, we try to keep that in the release 3, may get pushed to release 4, depending upon the level of effort there. As I said, we're really trying to stick to that July 7th date. So we may see some shifting there as we get closer to the 7th. And we continue the release and deployment planning. Hopefully around release 3 is when we'll begin to increase the onboarding of centers and have a higher migration rate, especially over from the legacy stack as well. So we're looking at what that roadmap looks like. What are the best paths forward there? When we think about Pure Connect and moving centers over, we're straddling 2 systems at that point. So we want to make sure that we have a minimal amount of disruption as possible with respect to the flow of those interactions. I saw there was a quick question in there regarding the extended package. So that's a great question. I can elaborate on that a little bit. So the extended package is really when we think about centers coming on board to the unified platform and have alternate lines of business that they support outside of 988, which could be other crisis lines, local crisis lines, things along that line. And being able to take the unified platform and extend it in order to support those other lines. There's some architectural implications there with respect to the platforms we're using, Genesys Cloud and Salesforce, and what that design looks like and how we could best support that. So in order to support that, there'll be some architectural changes that we'll need to make. And the level of effort there, we were hoping to include in release 3 so that we could begin offering that. So I hope that answers the question. If not, please let me know. Okay, I think we can go to the next slide, which I think is just our standard links for contacting us, and we can paste these into the chat as well for you. Certainly feel free to reach out. Any questions? We'll have a link to the demos, and then any requests or interest to join the unified platform, the link is there as well. So that's it. I'm going to hand it over to Analia as well, who can tee up the demo, and after that we'll have some Q&A. Thank you.
My name is Ember Fewer, and I am a solution architect with Coastal Cloud, who is the Salesforce implementation partner for the unified platform. This platform utilizes Genesys, Pure Cloud, Salesforce CRM, and Success KPI reporting. Today, we'll be demoing some of the features that are available to users on the unified platform. First, I'm going to focus on the Crisis Counselor experience, which is centered within Salesforce. Within the Salesforce UI, there are some basic functionalities available to users, such as the availability to search across the records that the user has access to, some basic help and training, navigation, as well as ability to navigate to different views of different types of records that we will show here in a minute. All interactions by any type of user, so crisis counselors, supervisors, center admins, will be answered and documented against their call reports within Salesforce. Currently, the channels of communication that are available on the unified platform are voice, chat, and text interactions. All these interactions will be surfaced through the Genesys Cloud CTI connector, which down here on the bottom of my screen is the window into any type of interaction. First, for a user to be able to accept an interaction, they will mark themselves as on queue. When an interaction is routed to an on-queue agent, the user will be alerted with both a visual notification and audio that a new interaction is available to be picked up. Once the user answers the interaction, they will have both a window into a chat or text thread, otherwise they'll just have a voice call started, as well as a case created for them to be guided through the stages of a call and document any information about the contact that they're working. Users can work on one voice interaction or up to 2 messaging, so chat or text interactions at one time. Once a user hits the capacity of the amount of interactions they can work, then they will not be offered any further until they have one wrapped up. When I answer a chat thread or messaging thread, I can scroll through to see anything that had been said so far, which in this case, there's not any messages waiting because it has just been initiated. The counselor can type in text to the help seeker. They can also choose to use canned responses to insert suggested responses into the messaging box for a more efficient way to communicate back and forth with the help seeker. When an agent becomes alerted to a second incoming interaction, it will offer the same functionality of both an audio alert and a visual cue that something new is available to be picked up. And as you'll see, when this one was answered, again, there will be another case record created, and we'll be able to scroll through, in this case, a text, any information that has been provided to the prompted questions, as well as any information provided during the survey, which we will look at here in just a second. When a crisis counselor is on multiple interactions, the system will toggle. So if I, head to this chat, you'll notice up here, this active highlighted case or contact report changes to keep in sync with the interaction that is being worked. If I toggle back to the text messaging thread, you'll see that the highlighted or focus tab also changes just to keep the data capture in sync. I'm going to minimize the window to walk through some of the features within the Salesforce UI related to working through an interaction and documenting any information. So what we're looking at here is called a case. This is where a contact report lives within Salesforce. There's a lot of information that can be gathered here. So across the top, we'll see some highlighted information from the interaction. So we're able to see the number that this text came from, the carrier, which queue that it's been routed to, as well as the interaction ID, etc. Next, we'll be able to see what are called quick links to related information that gets captured during the life of this interaction by the counselor. At this time, everything is pretty much empty because we just answered this, so we haven't input any information, except there is one survey record that's been created. That's also available right here, the pre-interaction survey details, so anything that is known at this time, which could be a portion of the field or all of the fields that you see could have been populated by the help seeker. Scrolling down a little further, we'll see on the left that we have an area for a crisis counselor to input notes at any time during this interaction. And then on the right is the start of the call report documentation. So we can identify whether this is transactional call that has content or a non-transactional, so perhaps like a wrong number or a hang up, etc. And there are different types of categories suggested for non-transactional interactions. We will choose transactional so that we can show some of the other features once we're in an interaction. Can designate whether this is third party or a help seeker is calling on behalf of themselves. After indicating those initial data points, the crisis counselor will be presented with a lot more questions that they're able to ask and gather information on throughout their interaction. First of which being the required prompt questions to evaluate suicide risk of the caller. Answering yes to either of the prompt questions will suggest and generate a safety assessment and a safety plan for the crisis counselor to work through with the help seeker. I'm going to input a couple data points just for the sake of demoing some other features. Scrolling through just slowly so you can notice there are basic contact details, so anything the contact chooses to provide, such as address, email, etc. There are fields in which to capture demographics about the help seeker. There are data points to capture veteran-related information. Throughout the entire UI, if an answer to a specific question has other items that become required when answering that way, or conditional questions, then as you saw when we clicked yes, they'll be able to answer additional information. They'll also be able to identify any concerns, imminent risk, homicidal ideation, and consent for follow-up. For now, I'm going to save. And you'll notice when I saved, because I had answered yes to one or more of the prompt questions, that I'm now suggested and encouraged to fill out an assessment and a safety plan. So these have now been automatically generated for the crisis counselor. And when they open the record, they'll be able to input any data related to the assessment and safety plan right here in the same window that they were answering the other data points about the interaction. I will just answer a few of these for the sake of example, and then we will come down here and we will complete our assessment. You'll notice all of these sections do expand and collapse just to help the counselor have a little bit of control over their view and save page space when needed. I'll briefly show the safety plan, which has a few questions. This was built to mimic the public-facing mysafetyplan.org site so that the crisis counselor is able to input any information here that they talked through while working through the safety plan with the help seeker. There is the ability to provide resources to the help seeker using a resource search. All centers are able to provide resources to the platform and share their resources with any other center on the platform. So if you come onto this platform and you provide resources for your state or center, you will not only be able to see your own, but you'll be able to see resources offered for any other center that has opted into the platform. In this resource search, this can be searched based on location or different designations, such as if you wanted to see all of a certain type of specialty within a state or certain location. You can also do a name search. So there's several different capabilities here. You can set the distance of how far from an address that you would be considering looking for resources in. And if you do find a search result that is consistent with what you would like to provide the help seeker, you can select one and quickly enter in the information, and that will then be represented on the case itself. For any referrals that are not part of the database or outside of database referrals, there's also an option to manually enter additional resources as you're working through an interaction. In this case, I had not consented to follow up. At this point, before I hang up the interaction with the help seeker, I would want to hopefully gain consent for follow-up, which would then present me with information in order to actually perform that follow-up. So coming back to these open interactions, I would be able to go back and forth with the help seeker as we showed briefly earlier and toggle between their information. Once I am ready, I've gathered all of the information I needed to safely end the conversation. I can disconnect with the help seeker. When I do disconnect this message, they'll be able to perform or fill out a post-call survey that will be available for supervisors to review and report on about the interaction to evaluate whether the help seeker had a positive experience and feels better after using this crisis line. After hanging up the interaction, the crisis counselor can input any information needed for reporting and wrap up before submitting the case. So you'll see here, as with most every other section, everything is optional just because we don't want to burden counselors with having to fill out required fields to navigate through a conversation. There are items that are strongly suggested to gather the data points for and a place to put data points that you've captured during a conversation, but we just don't want to slow anything down by requiring it. Once an interaction ends and the counselor has finished wrapping up, as you'll see, this did pop up when something was disconnected. They'll be able to indicate when they're ready to accept another interaction to be routed to them. If I've hung up and I feel a need, or the crisis counselor feels a need to reach back out to the help seeker because they're concerned about their safety, if the help seeker provided a phone number, the crisis counselor can make an outbound safety support call to check back in with the help seeker. This is very easy for them to do because they can simply click on the link that phone number that had been provided by the help seeker, which will allow them to place an outbound call and then indicate different outcomes of that call. So if they do reach out for safety support and they do need to reassess safety, the system will automatically generate a new contact report to represent the new conversation taking place. Closing out of the cases, we'll take a brief look at follow-up. So as you'll see, the follow-up that we had scheduled is logged against this original inbound case. Users will be able to track their follow-ups in many ways. They can reference it directly from the case that they had worked. They can access a list of follow-ups on their homepage. They can also have a calendar available to them to track all of their scheduled follow-ups for the center across a calendar view. The follow-up attempts can be easily counted against the original inbound because as a counselor goes through the follow-up process, the records will either be updated with a status of attempted or completed depending on the outcome of the call. So opening up a follow-up record, this is similar outbound call. They can simply click to reach out to perform the follow-up and make that call, and then provide answers to a guided prompt to designate the outcome of the call and whether they've successfully connected and create a new outbound follow-up case to represent that new conversation, or whether there was no answer and they need to schedule another attempt so those attempts can be logged. Lastly, before switching to the Genesys Cloud platform demo, I'm going to navigate to the homepage just to show that list that I was talking about, to see a quick view of follow-up events, as well as the list of post-conversation survey results that's available to supervisors real-time within Salesforce. That is all that I have today from Salesforce.
Okay, I think that is it for the counselor portion. I will note that there is another half of this demo that reviews some of the supervisor features. We did want to play it all today. It's lengthy. I think the whole video is about 40 minutes. So if you wanted to see the supervisor section, you're welcome to go to the shared folder with the demos and view that there. And then if you had any questions, you can reach out to us regarding that. I'm going to try and go through some of the questions that we had in the chat here, starting at the top. So Rebecca, you are referring to some of the nomenclature within the platform regarding the use of the word counselor, as well as assessments. Very interesting that have those regulations, and I think we'd be interested to know what sort of changes would accommodate those regulations so that we'd be in compliance there. I don't know if it's label changes simply, or there's more to it. And I'm not sure if the clinical team had thought about that during the design, but that's something we can definitely take back and review for you, so we can get back to you on that one.
I'll jump in here, Morgan, just to share that I received a question directly to me, so I don't know if you'll see it, but from Robin Thomas after Rebecca. She asked, what is the difference between a transactional and non-transactional contact?
That's a good question. I think the transactional is actually an individual who has reached out for help and essentially dialed the correct line or came in through chat and text correctly. Annalie, I don't know if you want to clarify that, but a non-transactional might be, say, a wrong number, so that it's something that you don't necessarily have a case associated with, but there's a record of something coming in, and rather than marking it as a valid call, transactional, there's just a way to differentiate between the two. So we know in the system that we can sort of ignore that record. And Annalie, correct me if I'm wrong there, but I think I got it right.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right, Morgan. It's all the records, all the calls are tracked. And so this allows us to have full accounting for calls that come in that did not create a contact report.
Great. So the next question on my list, Shell, would it be possible to port the information from this crisis form in the UP to our own EHR system, health record system? So that is where we would start to think about the extended package, right? Salesforce, where the bulk of that data is contained, certainly has many features in order to get data out. Export features, a rich API set, or that application programming interface, that set that allows strong integration with another platform, and that's what you could utilize to push right to your EHR system. But we would look at that as more of extended, because that's specific more to your center and your center's needs, but definitely something that we would want to support in that package. Cassandra is asking about a chatter or a texter returning to the Lifeline. Is the new counselor able to see the previous safety plan created? So that all depends upon the center that accepted, right, that initial interaction. So counselors within the same center, right, will be able to see that center's data. And there's some guidelines around that, some governance around that as well. But for the most part, a center will be able to see its own data. So if that interaction, the next interaction, is picked up by the same center, then it's contained there and you'd be able to see that. Okay, where it gets a little tricky is if that individual comes back and then goes to, say, another center or a national backup, that's where you wouldn't necessarily see that data across centers. And the reason for that is some data governance guidelines, privacy issues across states, things along those lines. So that's how it's restricted now. Certainly, if we have a little more clarity about that data sharing, we might be able to open it up. But to be safe for now, we're keeping it contained within the center. So I hope that answered that question. Is it expected, from Lucinda, is it expected that crisis counselors would complete the assessment safety plan while on the phone or after the call is completed? I believe you could do either one. The case will remain open, so after an interaction, so you could go back and do that. So it might be up to your center's workflow whether or not you'd be able to do that during the interaction or after the interaction. Leslie is reaching out about 211 resource database. Where are the resources coming from that we saw in the demo? The resources in the demo are essentially a resource database within Salesforce. The centers supplied us with the data from their resource database, and we imported it in and created that resource database within Salesforce. So where centers like yourself have a 211 resource database that you maintain, we wouldn't necessarily want to pull it in the same way. It might be double work if you're maintaining both. So in this particular case, we would look to see how we could integrate with that and pull that in Salesforce so it's available for you, but you're still maintaining it in that same place. You don't necessarily have to do the double duty. In addition, we're also looking at what other third parties we could partner with and integrate with. I know there's a national 211 database as well, and we're exploring options of integrating with them potentially for the platform. So looking to take advantage of some of those other options we have when it comes to the resource database. But I understand your question there, especially if you're already maintaining a fairly robust one that's part of a larger ecosystem, right, of that 211 national database. We certainly wouldn't want to disturb that in any way. Lucinda had another question about the survey. The surveys are available for calls, chats, texts eventually. I believe we're working on some additional features with respect to chat text surveys, but there is also a survey for voice. Colleen is asking about mandatory fields. I believe there are a few mandatory fields, but really not that many, because we didn't want to essentially bog down the counselor with restrictions on mandatory fields. There are a few, but we wanted the flexibility there for the counselor to be able to jump around and fill in fields as needed and saving along the way. For the resources to be texted in respect to outbound follow-ups via text, I believe that was answered there. So that's something that we are working on, outbound text for follow-up. So you would be able to text resources or perform follow-up by text after that interaction. And then Lucinda is confirming that the crisis counselor indicates when they are ready to take another call. It is not automatic once they hang up. I believe there is some after call wrap up, right? That is automatically built in, but the counselor can control their status, pre-built statuses as far as breaks, lunches, after call work, and things like that. So there is some control there for the counselor, and they're placed back into the queue when they're ready. They aren't necessarily forced in without any ability to set their own status. Oh, I see Rebecca's replying. Thank you for that. I see. Okay, great. Katrina, does the transcript of the text disappear when the case is completed? If so, can the supervisor see it in the supervisor status? I believe the interaction is searchable by the supervisor. It's unclear to me whether or not that text will disappear or whether it's available to the counselor within the case, essentially in the Salesforce view or not. So I can check on that one for you. But for certainly the supervisor for and potentially QA, right? That text is available on that supervisor side. How will resources be maintained? Currently, the resources are maintained at the center level. It's not necessarily something that we're doing, for the current centers. It's within Salesforce, and they would maintain that resource database. As we expand and think about integrating, right, that maintenance might not necessarily fall on the center. Let's say we integrate with a larger national database that would be maintained somewhere else, and the center could pull from there. If they were still maintaining their own local resources, there's some question about what that workflow would look like. Do they want a separate database to supplement that national database? Do they want to provide those updates back into that national database? Things along those lines we'd have to iron out. But currently, that database that's in there, that's maintained by that specific center. Okay, I think I'm at the end of the list. Tom, did you have any other questions on your end there?
No, I don't. No other direct questions to me. We still have a couple of minutes, folks. So if there are any other burning questions you might have, feel free to throw them in the chat, or beyond questions, any comments, feedback about what you've seen today, please feel free to put that in the chat as well. Of course, if all your questions have been answered, we don't have to stare at a screen for the last 5 minutes of the presentation. But we'll give it just another minute just to see if anyone would like to have ask any other questions.
Like we got a few here.
Got a few there.
Mary Jean will chat. Text services be required to use the UP? No. So if you wanted to use it for voice only, you could. If you wanted to use it for chat text only, you could, or all three modalities. That's certainly something that we can split out depending upon, your need. Will the cases be identified by phone number, Melika? So the phone number is within the case. So I believe it'll be searchable with respect to that the case will have a unique ID really that's associated with that, as the phone number could potentially be have interactions associated, multiple interactions associated with it. So we need really a unique ID for each interaction, and that's what we would key on for the data pertaining to that interaction. But the phone, if it's a voice call, right, or a text, that phone number will be automatically recorded into that case as it comes in. Katrina, who is the best resource to find out what the volume of text is for a particular area code in your state? That's a good question. That's probably a data request or potentially for the ops team. If you want to submit that question through, actually, we'll pull it from here, and then we can get you an answer. Who the best person there? We've got a couple avenues, so I can get back to you on that one.
Last chance for anyone who has any final questions for Morgan. And of course, if you think of any questions after the presentation today, we hold these monthly on the first Friday of each month. So fear not, we will be able to answer any of the questions that you have after this presentation in the next Unified Platform Update webinar, which I wish I could tell you off the top of my head what day that is, but first Friday of June. Sending the presentation. Yep, we will be sending a recording as well as a question answer document of all of these questions that have been asked today with their responses provided by Morgan in an email to the Crisis Center Network via our normal network messaging route, probably within the next week, possibly 2 weeks, depending on our turnaround time. So that way you can review the document and or check out the recording if you had missed any part of this presentation today. And the demo will be made available as well. So currently up to this point, we've shown a number of different demos of various aspects of the unified platform. We do have a Google Drive that houses all of these demos that you can access at your leisure. That will be included. We'll have a link to that at the top of the question answer document that we're going to be sending out. I think we'll also probably insert that within the actual message itself that we send out to all you folks. So this demo, as well as any of the other demos that we have presented on so far, will be made available in those materials that we send out. And Analia has kindly provided that link in the chat right now, so feel free to grab it. Yeah, and I think we are at quarter of, so we're gonna come to a close for this presentation for today. But I do want to thank everyone so much for your engagement and your questions and feedback in today's Unified Platform Update. As I mentioned, a lot of these materials are going to be bundled up into a network message that we'll send out in the next week to potentially 2 weeks, depending on the turnaround time for the recording and the question answer document. If you have any questions after this presentation, feel free to reach out to us directly. You can reach out to communications@vibrant.org with any questions that you might have. And I think that is it. Thank you so much, Morgan, as always, for the monthly update, and we will see all of you later. Have a great Friday and a great weekend, everyone.